All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining me today. It is Tuesday, March 19th, and we are going to be talking about the White Mountain HMA in southern Wyoming. And I'm going to go ahead and share screen here today. I did a slideshow presentation that I'm going to share with you all. And then I'll be popping out of that and bringing up some other stuff as well. All right, so again, if you have any questions, go ahead and throw them in the chat box or make a note of them. We'll do a Q&A at the end. Please stay muted because I am recording this presentation and we'll be sharing it up on my YouTube channel for those who couldn't make it today and want to watch it later. All right, I always like to start out these presentations, and I haven't done one since last summer, but I like to let you guys know where we're talking about. There are still 165 wild horse and burro areas across the West. Most people haven't heard of most of them. We all know the famous ones, Onakee, Sandwash Basin, McCulloch Peaks, but I like to let you guys know where these other ones are located. So the White Mountain HMA is located in south central Wyoming, right near Rock Springs, the town of Rock Springs. You can actually get to this HMA pretty quickly in about 15 minutes, and you can usually start seeing horses in about 20 to 25. The White Mountain HMA in Rock Springs is actually advertised all over town. They have little signs along the road that say Wild Horse Loop. They call it the Pilot Butte Wild Horse Loop. So the two main roads within the HMA are pretty well graveled. One of the reasons that they're not going to be zeroing out the White Mountain HMA, and they did talk about it at one point, is that there was a public protest because the White Mountain Pilot Butte Loop is a tourist draw for the town of Rock Springs, Wyoming. These are some of the horses that I have photographed while there. I just wanted to give you guys a view of what the horses look like there so you can see why it's so important to make your public comment on this issue and or any other public comment periods that come up for any of our wild horse and burro areas. That stallion in the upper left-hand corner is one of my favorite stallions out on the range. He is huge. His neck is gigantic. He has very few scars on him because I think most of the other stallions in the area know to not mess with him. And he has himself a very beautiful band of horses, which includes the three in the bottom right photo there. A few more of the horses that I photographed when I was there in July last year. And then I wanted to show you what the White Mountain HMA looks like. So this is typical of most HMAs in Wyoming, where you have some pretty flat, hilly land, with the exception of Green Mountain, which is quite forested. But the rest of them, this is what you'll see: sagebrush, pretty flat, hilly land. Some of the roads in the White Mountain HMA look pretty good, such as the one in the bottom left-hand corner. Then you get a two-track, such as the top left-hand corner, which is pretty good to drive on for most vehicles. And then in the bottom right-hand corner, you get a two-track that, while it looks like it's somewhat smooth, it's not. It was quite bumpy, actually. The horses do like to use the roads and the two tracks whenever possible. It helps them to avoid things like rattlesnakes. They can see holes and stuff easier, so they'll generally use the roads whenever they can. And then I also just wanted to quickly cover with you guys what a checkerboard looks like. You'll see the word checkerboard talked about a lot with the herd management areas near Rock Springs, which includes White Mountain, Salt Wells Creek, which is just south of Rock Springs, Divide Basin, which is northeast of Rock Springs, and the Adobe Town HMA, which is southeast of Rock Springs. So the checkerboard is broken up into 1 mile square pieces of private and public land. Yes, so every mile you drive, you'll be crossing from public land into private land, back into public, back into private. It's kind of an absurd situation that was set up by, can't remember the name of the railroad, but it was set up by a railroad many, many, many decades ago. And apparently there's a legal thing that says that the private lands cannot be fenced off, which is even more absurd because one of the main reasons the horses in this area get rounded up is because the so-called private property owners want the horses removed from the private property. Yet every mile the horses walk, they're varying from public to private land. So it's just really an absurd situation down there. And then I just wanted to quickly show you this map, which I got off of the Western Watersheds Project website. I refer to this map all the time, and I did include the link to it in the chat box. Back in 1990, when was it? I have to move your guys' little box here. Back in the 1970s, Wyoming actually had 42 wild horse herds, and today we're just down to 13. BLM wants to take that down to 11 by also zeroing out the Salt Wells Creek HMA, one of my favorites, and the Divide Basin HMA. And then they want to take the Adobe Town HMA and reduce it by something like 50 or 60%, somewhere between 40 and 60%. So all those areas in pink that you see on here, these are all HMAs that have already been zeroed out. And then also from the Western Watersheds website, this is something that usually the reason I go to their website is just to see what the grazing allotments are. It's an interactive map, so you can zoom into all the states, and they've listed all of the current HMAs with the name. And then if you click on that HMA in certain areas of it, it will show you where the grazing allotments are. So you'll see on the left, if you click in the upper corner of White Mountain, it shows you that particular HMA. Sorry, that particular grazing allotment that allows over 16,000 sheep and cattle to be grazed. And then whenever I clicked anywhere else within the White Mountain HMA, on the right there, you can see that it actually shows a huge grazing allotment area, which encompasses many of the HMAs and areas. So when it says 315,000 total livestock over here, that's not just on the White Mountain HMA. It's on the bottom 2/3 of it, but also includes many, many other areas. And I assume this has something to do with the Rock Springs Grazing Association. We are, however, not going to be talking about grazing anymore today, because the grazing allotments and the cattle grazing within the White Mountain HMA is not going to be included as part of your public comment, because it has absolutely nothing to do with, supposedly nothing to do with why they're doing this particular roundup. Now, I know that's not true, you guys. I understand that livestock is the main reason, but livestock grazing is not listed in the NDA that they're using for the purpose of this roundup. Okay, so the White Mountain HMA was already listed on the fiscal year 24 gather schedule before this NDA public comment period came out. I enlarged it down here at the bottom for you so that you could see the White Mountain HMA roundup is scheduled to start August 15th and run for 30 days, where they intend to permanently remove 586 wild horses and not return any of them. And the reason that they have listed for that is to achieve low AML. For those of you that are new to this, AML stands for appropriate management level. That is an arbitrary number, not based in science, that some people literally just pulled out of a hat one day and said, okay, this is the number of horses we're going to allow in a certain area. So generally the first place that I find where they're doing a public comment period, if I don't see it listed on Facebook already, is the Bureau of Land Management's press releases. I generally keep that tab open, and I was going to show it to you guys, but their website is down presently. And then if you look at the press releases, you can click on generally a link within the press release, and it will take you to this page, which is the BLM National NEPA Register. And then over here on the left, you'll have the home button. You'll have the documents, which I have clicked on, which shows you here. And then you have participate now, and that is where you will actually make your public comment. But before you make your public comment, you want to go ahead and peruse the documents. Some of the public comment periods that come up will have a very lengthy list of documents. This one only has 3, and all of these were very short and easy to read. So definitely read them all, peruse them all, find out what the public comment period is about before you make your public comments. All right, so this was the news release that came up on the left-hand side. So this was the first thing that came out. I highlighted in pink the important part of this news release, which is that BLM completed a population survey for the HMA in 2022 and found 549 wild horses present on the HMA at that time. Considering an estimated annual growth rate of 20%, the estimated number of wild horses within this HMA in 2024 is 791. So I made some notes over here, things to note. That the press release states in 2022, the population was 549, and in 2024 is now 791. Yet the BLM herd and management statistics population PDFs for March 2022 shows only 205 wild horses, and they state that that is within AML. And the March 2023 PDF shows 549 wild horses, and they list that as being 183% above AML. So if you use the news release numbers of 549 times 20%, that would mean that there were 110 foals born in 2022. They're saying that every single one of those foals survived. So you take that 110, add it to the 549, you get 659. If you multiply that times 20%, you have 132 foals born in 2023. Apparently, every single one of those foals survived, and no horses died of an elderly age or injuries on the range. So that is how they came up with the number of 791 for the 2024 population count. I'm going to show you the population PDFs here in a second. But if you actually look at the population PDF for 2022, again, they listed the herd area within AML at 205. And the reason they did that was because they had the big roundup. And so they calculated the number of horses before the roundup, the number of horses they removed, and they brought it down to 205. If you multiply that times 20%, that would mean that 41 foals were born in 2022, not 110. If all 41 foals survived and no wild horses died on the range, you're now at 246. Times 20% equals 49 foals born in 2023. Again, every single horse survived. None of them passed away. And that gave us a total population of 295. So once again, the BLM's numbers on population are just sort of all over the place. And they don't seem to be paying attention to their own information. Now, of course, they do cover themselves with that, and I'll go over that here in just a second. Okay, so this is the second document, the Dear Reader letter, they call it. The second document on that list of 3 documents that I showed you a moment ago. And again, the important part of this is that the BLM proposes to gather and remove 586 excess wild horses to the low end of the appropriate management level on the White Mountain HMA. So I believe, if I remember correctly, I put it over here. The AML for White Mountain is 205 to 300 wild horses on 393,000 acres. That's a lot of acres per horse. And here I put the majority of the HMA consists of checkerboard land ownership within the Union Pacific Railroad grant. So again, this was something that was done decades and decades and decades ago. So consolidated public lands with state school selections and small parcels of private land make up the remaining lands in the northeast section of the HMA. So the entire HMA is just broken up into little bits and pieces of public, private, and state school sections of land. You never know if you're on one or the other. All right, so this is what's important. And when I said you guys should read the documents on the BLM page, this is what I'm talking about. So when reviewing any documents on there, you want to compare them. In this particular case, for what they're calling the DNA, you want to compare it to the most recent EA, environmental assessment, and they listed the link to the EA within the DNA. So I just copied it, pasted it, Googled it, and brought it up. And I compared the two together, and the only thing that I could see that the two had in common was the population count of horses. So when I said earlier that we're not going to be talking about livestock grazing within the HMA, this is why. Because the DNA itself is all about the number of horses within the HMA and does not mention livestock grazing at all. So if you comment about livestock grazing or horse slaughter or anything else within your public comment, they're just going to throw it away. They're not going to pay attention to it whatsoever. So there's no point in doing it. I had personally never seen a DNA before. I know I've only been doing this for about 4 years. But in that time, I'd never seen one and I didn't know what it was. So I reached out to Laura Lee and had a couple of conversations with her day before yesterday to ask her what it was about. And she said that BLM actually stopped doing DNAs around 11 years ago, back in 2013. And she has been fighting to get them to start doing them again as part of the process. So I found in her article that she wrote a while back that Wild Horse Education, Laura Lee, is now in court on the issue of DNAs. And she has, I believe, 2 pending lawsuits based on this to try and get this particular public comment period put back in to the process of the public being able to participate in what happens on our public lands with our wild horses. All right, this is a bit of a long page, but population disparity, again, is what we're going to be commenting on. So the White Mountain Roundup of 2021 actually ran from January 6th to January 17th of 2022. This was a huge roundup that not only included White Mountain, but also Little Colorado, which is adjacent to White Mountain just to the north. It also included Salt Wells Creek, Divide Basin, and Adobe Town. So they rounded up thousands and thousands of horses in all of those HMAs. And the White Mountain section of it was the last one, which is why it got pushed into January. They removed 1,040 wild horses from the White Mountain and Little Colorado herd management areas. Again, those two were adjacent to each other. From what I can tell, and I am going to double check when I go back out there in June, I don't believe there's any fencing that actually separates those two herds from each other. The road that I was on, the highway that I was on when I drove between the two, actually had horse manure all over the road. So that tells me the horses are crossing the highway from one area to another. But I will double check on the fencing in June when I go out there. The Rock Springs Wild Horse Manager, Jay, who I did meet out on the Salt Wells Creek Range last July, I sent him an email and asked him if they had done any population counts since the roundup, because the 2024 population statistics page has not come out yet. And it's generally released in March, although last year they didn't release it until I think it was nearly end of April. So I wanted to know if they had done one. And he told me via email that they did do an infrared count of the horses about 10 months after the roundup. And then today, in a follow-up email, I asked him for a copy of the actual report, which he didn't willingly share with me, but today he did send it to me. And the report shows that the infrared population count was actually from November 2022 through January 2023. And I'll show you guys what he sent me here in a moment. On the March 2023 herd statistics, BLM now claims there are 549 White Mountain horses. So how can they claim an increase of just 344 wild horses in 10 months? And I do this all the time as a joke, but I say that would mean that every single stallion, mare, and foal on the range would have had to have had a foal, with 69 of those horses having twins. So when you compare their 2021 and 2022 population counts, that's the only thing that feasibly makes sense. Either they don't know what they're doing and they don't know how to count horses, and it just proves that their 20% increase year over year is complete BS, or they don't understand that stallions and foals can't have foals of their own to increase the population number. Of course, the reality is that the last actual count was in 2019, and all BLM did was just reduce the number of horses they rounded up from that count. And that was how they came up with 205 horses in March 2022. Because again, the roundup was in January. They had a population count. They reduced the horses they rounded up. That was how they came up with 205. They didn't actually go out and count them again after the roundup. So here is the herd statistics from March 1st, 2022. I put these arrows on here so you guys could see the date. I highlighted the White Mountain HMA. You can see they have listed here the 2022 estimated horse population at 205, and that it's within AML. And again, the link to this document is in the chat box. And then we have 2023. Again, I highlighted White Mountain. All of a sudden, the herd has jumped up to 549, which they consider to be 183% over AML. And then they list the most recent year at AML being 2018. Now, if we go back a page, you'll notice over here, most recent year at AML is 2022. But all of a sudden in 2023, the horses were no longer within AML in 2022, and they haven't been within AML since 2018. All right, so I copied and pasted this. The 2021 population estimate was based on a 2019 count when they did an aerial survey flight. And typically what they do is they go up in a airplane and they put a person on each side of the airplane, and that is how they count horses. So they fly over the HMA in a certain pattern, and you have people on both sides of an airplane counting horses. And sometimes I'll be out on the range with somebody and we'll be joking, because this is actually considered a simultaneous double count observer method. So it's not really an accurate way of counting horses because you've got two people doing it, and who knows whether they're actually counting the same horses or not, because they're doing it from the air. They're not photographing them to determine whether the horses are the same or not. So sometimes when I go out on the range, we'll see a bird and we'll be like, oh, hey, we see two birds. So it's not just one bird, it's two birds. BLM will often count one horse as two horses when they do this. A 20% annual herd growth rate was added to the 2019 adult survey counts of horses to calculate the 2020 population, and another 20% was added to calculate the 2021 population. And then again, as specified in a 2013 consent decree, in years when a wild horse population survey was not conducted, BLM can go ahead and just utilize a 20% annual herd growth rate. Not at all taking into account that foals might pass away, that horses on the range might pass away, et cetera, et cetera. And that is how their numbers get so large so fast. And then I took this graphic from the actual 2020 EA, which is what they refer to in the DNA, and this is on page 7. And again, they show the White Mountain with the AML of 205 to 300. They show their 2019 survey count done by the air. They added 20% to come up with 469. They added another 20% to get to 563. And then in 2021, they considered there to be 358 excess horses. And then they went out and rounded them up. Again, these numbers don't match up with the population herd statistic pages. All right, so here was my email to Jay. He says, to answer your question, there was an infrared census conducted in November to December of 2022. The population reported for 2022, that's what they considered the population to be reported for 2022. And the census, he said, then took place about 10 months after the roundup, but it was actually more like a year after the roundup. Okay, so I'm just going to exit this here for a second and show you guys the email that I just got from him about an hour before we started this. Oops. Hang on, the Zoom thing isn't letting me. Okay. All right, so this was the attached document that I got back from him. What did he say in the email? Heather, here is the report from the 2022 infrared census. Everything counted was classified as an adult in this survey because there was no obvious size differentiation due to the time of year. So that was a question I asked him in the email was, did you count every horse as an adult horse, or did you not count the foals? And he's claiming that because of the way the infrared census reads the horses, they were unable to determine which ones were adults and which ones are foals. And I guarantee you there were foals out there because, as we all know, the wild horses have foals basically year round, but certainly as late as August, September, October. But BLM also has a thing in their wild horse and burro handbook where as of January 1st, no matter how old the foal is or when in the previous year it was born, as of January 1st, it's considered an adult. So they didn't care if the horse was only 2 months old. It's now an adult grown mare or stallion. All right, so let me pull this back up again. So here was his summary report, and this is how the infrared system works out on the range. So this is how they were counting horses. The airplane went over in a certain pattern, and the horses or any other animals on the land showed up in white. And then they just differentiated which ones were horses, which ones were deer, which ones were elk, et cetera, et cetera. I just wanted to show this to you guys. I did reach out to a couple people to see if they had heard of them doing infrared counts in Wyoming before. And the people that I reached out to said they knew that it was something that was being talked about, but that they didn't know it had actually been used yet. This also goes to show you what kind of information you can get if you go ahead and email the BLM and ask them for information, that they will generally reply to you. Okay, so one of the pages I wanted to scroll down here to was, again, here it says, on November 11th, 2022, they began their aerial infrared survey, and they talk about how they did the survey, et cetera, et cetera. They talk again about the population counts in different areas. And then I'm just going to scroll down to White Mountain here because that's what we're talking about today. Okay, so for the White Mountain HMA, it's approximately 391,000 acres, includes the National Wildlife Refuge. And then they talk about the elevation profiles. And then here, the survey of the White Mountain HMA began on December 6, 2022, and concluded on December 9th, 2022, though 2 days did not include flights due to weather and maintenance, respectively. They talk about how they divided it up. And then say, but due to topography differences, were flown diagonally from northeast to southwest instead of north to south. This allowed the biologists to be able to achieve higher coverage throughout the ravines, and there are some deep canyon ravines within the HMA. And then here they state they found 549 wild horses observed in 67 independent detections. The largest group detected consisted of 39 individuals. And then given the recorded totals, the HMA is 83% or 249 individuals over AML. And then they differentiated the elk numbers because they knew we would ask. And they claimed there was 149 elk within the area, and the largest group was 28 individuals. So again, this was something they did in 2022, which means ever since then, they've just been increasing the herd numbers by 20%. So they haven't done another actual census since this infrared one was done. And it was done really before the worst of the winter came through. So 2022, 2023, for those of you that don't know, Wyoming and many states in the West had an exceptionally harsh winter. And Wyoming itself lost 90% of their pronghorn population, and then something like 60% of their mule deer population. But they don't claim that any wild horses died at all. In fact, it is stated somewhere that BLM believes only 2 horses died in the White Mountain HMA of that whole winter, and they don't blame it on weather conditions. They blame it on the age of the horses and that they just died because they were older horses. I just have to laugh at that because Laura Lee said to me that the BLM now considers wild horses to be supermen. They don't die. They never die out on the range. So while every other member of wildlife in Wyoming died by the thousands, apparently no wild horses died anywhere. Now, I for a fact know that isn't true because I went through the Stewart Creek HMA last year and I did come across bands of dead horses, multiple horses that died together and were still laying next to each other on the ground with their hides on. And I'm sorry to be so descriptive, but what that told me was that those deaths were recent and it was because of the winter. So I was there in May and July and found dead horses in the Stewart Creek HMA. If horses died there because of the harsh winter, I 100% guarantee you they also died in the White Mountain HMA because of the winter conditions. So these are the points that you're going to make for your public comment. And again, you're strictly going to stick with the population counts, how they don't add up, and how we want a new current count before the roundup in August to confirm exactly how many wild horses are out on the White Mountain HMA. And you can bring up the winter of 2022, 2023, and you can talk about how it was especially harsh. And you can talk about how Wyoming Game and Fish stated that 2/3 of the Wyoming mule deer population was lost and that 90% of the pronghorn population was lost. I put this line in here before I got the email from Jay, but if BLM did do a count using a new method, for example, infrared, then they need to disclose the actual data and method used to determine that those were horses and not elk. We've now seen that method. We've now seen the data behind it. But again, that infrared count was done before the actual harsh winter happened. And then you can talk about how a 20% increase in wild horse populations is unreliable and not at all based on science and is not at all accurate. It does not take into account foal deaths or natural attrition. And then you can ask for a new EA, environmental assessment, to be created before the gather starts in August. That includes a new population census, and that EA must be made available for a new public comment period before the roundup starts. You want to stay on point and be factual. The BLM is not going to read emotional submissions. Your comment can be short. It can only be a paragraph or 2 paragraphs if that's what you want. There's no need to write a long, lengthy letter. Now, I know you guys can't write all this down while I have this on the screen. So again, I'm going to copy and paste this into an email and send it out to you all, and I'm going to put it up on the website so you can refer back to it. Again, don't talk about horse slaughter. They're just going to take that comment and throw it out. This is not the time to talk about horse slaughter. This is not the time to talk about livestock grazing. All right, so after I talked to Laura, she went ahead and did an article and put it up on her website and shared it out. And she put down also some key points that you guys can talk about, which is very similar to what I had written down already. Of course, Laura knows far more than I do, and she's far more experienced. So she said that a substantive comment for White Mountain might sound something like, the population survey of 2022 is inadequate to determine that there are now 791 horses currently residing in the HMA. The winter of 2023 caused massive die-off of numerous grazing animals, including wild horses. BLM simply asserts that wild horses are akin to a superspecies and are not impacted, and that is not true. If elk can die, pronghorn can die, and deer can die, wild horses can die due to the winter conditions as well. The proposed capture of 586 wild horses could cause the population levels to drop below AML if in fact their population count is incorrect, which we are stating that it is, and that the BLM must provide current census maps and any mathematical process used to determine the current numbers. So again, we want them to go out and do a new population count, one that's fresher than the one that they did with the infrared in 2022. And then even Laura herself put, please use your own words. We want every public comment to be unique. So while I have given you information and Laura has given you information, and I know Carol Walker did a post with information, please do not just copy and paste that into a public comment. Take it, turn it into your own paragraphs, even if it's just 1 or 2, but make it your own words so that each and every public comment that we all submit is unique. That is the only way they will count them, is if every single one is unique. Okay, this was also in the documents. This is actually the main page, I think, of the document thing. Can't quite remember why I put this up here. But they do talk about the project description. They talk about what's new. This is the page you'll see when you click on the document page. Oh, I know why I did it. Okay, so once you've decided what you want to write down, and I suggest writing it separately and then copying and pasting it. But once you're ready, what you want to do is click on the green Participate Now button. And that will then take you to this page here. So it couldn't get any simpler. You just put your comment into that box right there. You are limited to 5,000 characters. You can also upload some files if you want to by dragging and dropping them in. So if you have a longer document to include with your public comment, you can put that right here. You don't have to put your name in even. That's an optional box. So you can include your name or not include your name. If you want to provide additional contact information, that would be if you want to include the name of an organization that you volunteer for or are part of. You can also add additional names to it. So if you want to include a friend or your husband, just to show that there's more than one name attached to that letter, you can do that. Once you have all of that information in, you're just going to click the preview box down here in the bottom right-hand corner, which you cannot click on until you have the information entered in. You'll just double check to make sure that your comment is there, how you wrote it, and then you'll click submit, and that's all. It's so fast and easy to do once you have your public comment ready to put in there. All right, so just quickly, I was going to show you guys what the DNA actually looked like. So in the documents section on that page, when I keep saying DNA, DNA stands for Determination of NEPA Adequacy. So first we had the press release, then we had the Dear Reader letter, and then we had this DNA. And the DNA is a short 7 pages, so it was pretty quick and easy to read. I went ahead and printed it out. And then what I did was I highlighted the tracking number for the EA itself, which is right here. I highlighted that. I put it into a Google. I Googled it. I pulled up the EA, and then I had this printed out copy of this NEPA that I could compare to the EA on my computer screen to find out what matched and what was different between the two. And again, that's how I came up with the fact that this DNA strictly talks about the actual population and not about anything else at all. So that's why commenting on anything else at all will not be relevant to this particular public comment period. But I just wanted to show you guys what it looks like. They do repeat themselves a lot throughout it. They cover their bases a lot. But really the main thing is just that their population counts on what they put out as official documents did not add up with what they put in here. And the fact that somewhere in here they did talk about the winter, harsh winter of 2022, 2023, the fact that they haven't done an actual population count to reassess what it might be after that winter, that's just what you want to concentrate on. Also, Laura said that by them doing this DNA, if they do get relevant comments, and I'm sure, you know, for example, Wild Horse Education is going to submit a very relevant comment. What it does is it reopens litigation, meaning that there's the possibility of filing a lawsuit if your public comment is adequate enough and is able to rebut what this DNA has in it. So that's another reason why Laura's trying to get DNAs put back into the public comment process, because it reopens litigation possibilities. All right, let's see if we can finish this slideshow off really quick. Okay, I did want to quickly talk about petitions and quick click sign-ons. I know you guys see these all over Facebook. If you are on email lists for some of the bigger organizations, they might email these to you. This is something I've always understood, but also something Wild Horse Education covered, is that the petitions to stop wild horse roundups, when the process has already been done and the gather is already on the schedule, that petition will do nothing for you. It might help bring awareness to wild horse issues, but it's not going to stop a roundup by any means. The quick click sign-ons, and I've seen a couple of them for this roundup. Basically, what you're doing is you're just adding your name to a letter that the organization wrote. No matter how many times people click on a quick click sign-on and add your name to it, it's still just one letter. It could have 10,000 names signed on to it, but it's still just one letter. That's why it's so important for all of us to submit our own public comment. Now, did we submit over 6,000 public comments on the McCulloch Peaks herd? And was that more than any other public comment on wild horses in the past? Yes, it was. Did they ignore it? Yes, they did. And I can completely understand why you guys might be saying to yourselves, why are we bothering? Because we still have to let the BLM know that we are interested in the process. We still have to let them know what we think about these things. And again, the more public comments they get, the better. It just tells them that we're not ignoring them. It tells them that we don't agree with what they're doing. And in the case of Wild Horse Education or any other organization that submits a really relevant public comment, or even if you were to submit a really relevant public comment, it could open that roundup up to litigation. So that's the important part of it. Okay, so again, I'm going to throw those slides up on the website because I know that was a lot for you all to digest. I'm going to go over the chat box here in a minute, but I just wanted to talk about a couple other things that are going on right now that you guys can participate in. Chris Command with Chasing Horses Wild Horse Advocates and I are working together this year on some new things. We did put out some posts recently about trying to get enough people to go to Washington, D.C. to rally and lobby with us on the Hill. We were hoping for at least 50 people to sign up, but I think at most we got about 26 or 30. So we went ahead and canceled the DC trip. And what we're going to be doing instead is a series of free Zoom events. The first of which is next Monday, March 25th at 3 p.m. Mountain Time. And what we'll be doing is in these events is helping you learn how to contact your legislators, giving you tips of things to say, offering you support. We'll even join you on any Zoom meetings that you can get scheduled to offer you support during that meeting. Keep in mind, you'll more often than not be meeting with a staffer or an intern who is young, generally in their mid-20s. I might even here in a little bit ask Diane Tudis to unmute herself and talk about one or two of the meetings that she's had. She can just tell you guys how easy it is. So if you guys want to sign up for these and learn what this is about, and let me just say this, contacting your U.S. legislators, while it might seem futile, is not. Wild Horse Annie got the 1971 Act passed because she was in contact with Congress, and Congress unanimously passed that act back then. I see a lot of posts saying, well, it's just useless to contact our legislators. I've done it. All I get back is a canned letter, blah, blah, blah. Okay, you guys, what we have to do is get far more involved. And what Chris will be telling you guys during this meetings is what she did with the Theodore Roosevelt National Park horses. She not only started at the congressional level, she started at the state level. So you can start with your state legislators and discuss the issue with them, and then they can actually help you contact higher levels of legislators within your state, and then moving to the congressional level, and get you in touch with people. And that's how things happen. So we're going to give you guys the tools to do that. And we just need some really dedicated people who are willing to spend a couple hours a month contacting their legislators, maybe attending any town halls that your legislators have in your area, talking to them there. This is what we're going to help you guys do. And this is what is going to make real change. I talk about this all the time, but Representative David Schweikert of Arizona, he lives near the Salt River wild horses. I know they're not a BLM herd, but he loves them. He has great disdain for the Bureau of Land Management. And what he said to us repeatedly was that he knows we have wild horses because he lives near the Salt River ones. So he's aware of the issue. He knows what the BLM is doing is wrong. But he's got 434 other members of Congress who are his colleagues, and it is not his job to tell them what is going on. It is our job. And it's easier to do than you guys might think it is. And they do want to hear from us. That's what he said. We want to hear from you guys. That's our jobs. That's why we work for you. They're not going to know what's going on if we don't tell them. All right, second thing really quick, the 2024 postcard campaign. Again, working with Chris Kaman of Chasing Horses Wild Horse Advocates. This one was her idea. So what we're doing is, and there is still some time to participate because we're going to be ordering more postcards than we need. We have selected 98 members of Congress, both U.S. representatives and Senate members who are on the Appropriations Committee. The appropriations for 2024 is all but done, if not done completely. Mike Jenkins can answer that question for me in the chat box. So what we're going to be gearing towards is the 2025 appropriations, which they will be discussing this year for next year. We're also focusing on those members who are on the Natural Resources Committee and the Subcommittee for Public Lands. So this is a very targeted postcard campaign. We'll also probably include the White House in that, since we're sending you 100 postcards, but we've got 98 representatives. We'll probably just add the White House to that list. She's going to order the postcards. She'll send you 100 postcards for free. You guys just need to buy the stamps for them. Originally, we were going to cover the cost of the stamps because we only expected about 100, 150 people to participate in this campaign. And we have over 900 people participating now. We just cannot afford to send 900 people 100 postcard stamps. So you will need to buy the stamps and have those ready. You can buy those over a period of time. You don't have to buy all 100 at once. We're going to be sending you every week or so a new message to write on, say 10 postcards, and then you mail those 10 postcards in. And then a week later, we'll send you another message for 10 postcards, and you send those 10 postcards in. We'll be giving you the addresses of who we want those postcards sent to. So these will be very detailed. The postcards themselves also have a short paragraph on the back that talks about the picture on the front. So I did quite a few of the postcards, and I tried to use different herd management areas. And then I talked about the roundups in those areas, how much they cost the American taxpayer, how many horses might have died during the roundup, et cetera, et cetera. So there'll be lots of good information on those postcards. You guys can still sign up if you want to. And if we have leftover postcards, then Chris will go ahead and get those out to you. If we don't, you're more than welcome to buy your own postcards and then just use the messages and the addresses that we'll be sending you. Or you can get blank postcards and have kids do drawings of horses on them, stuff like that. And then lastly, and I'm going to pop over to the website and show you guys this. The picture in the upper left-hand corner is 235 packets that I personally mailed to members of Congress last summer. And those packets contained a 17-page letter that two really hardworking wild horse loving ladies helped me out with, Gretchen and Joanne. They wrote the letter. I just added some tidbits to it. So I give them all credit for that 17-page letter. I did a quick little fundraiser. It cost me, I think, $2 or $4 per, no, it was $2 per envelope to send them in. So you guys helped me out with the postage on that. And we sent that in last summer. When the roundup started, when they really started to gather horses in McCulloch Peaks in January of this year, I rewrote the letter. I reduced it to 9 pages. I included some new information. And I put out some posts and an email asking everybody to download that letter, print it out, and send it to your legislator. So it would be your U.S. representative and both of your 2 U.S. senators. And I asked you to send that both to their D.C. office and to their local state office. And the reason I would ask for both addresses, if possible, if you can print out that many copies, is that I spoke to somebody the other day from California, and she actually had a relative or a friend who works in the postal room on Capitol Hill. And she says that it can often take 60 days for mail to be received on the Hill, but then actually distributed to the members of Congress. 60 days is quite a long time. So that's why I thought if we can also send it to the representative's local state address, and they all have one, then they would get it there, but they would also get it in DC 1 to 2 months later. And I'll go to the website and show you guys where this is at here really quick. All right, so just lastly, thank you everybody for joining us today and learning how you can participate. There's the website address there if you haven't been there before. Let me just pop over to that really quick. Okay, so this is the main page of my website. And if you scroll down here, it's the letter campaign to members of Congress and your legislators. I tell you, if you don't know already, give you the directions on how to look up your U.S. representative, how to look up your 2 U.S. senators. Here's the download file right here. It's under the graphic. So if you just click on that, then it will download the file for you in PDF. It is 9 pages. You can attach a cover letter to the front of it if you want to, just telling them how important this issue is to you and your family. And then on the front page of the letter, you'll just need to fill in the date and then the address to the Senate, to each senator, and the address to the U.S. representative. Make sure you differentiate their DC address from their state address. And then on page 5, boy, my internet is slow today. On page 5, you'll just sign it, and then you want to include some contact information. It can be your address if you want it to, but I would definitely include your phone number and your email address so that when the staffers read the letter, if they have any questions for you, they can go ahead and contact you either via email or phone call. All right, that's just going to take too long, but the letter will come up for you guys, so you'll be able to see it there. And then I just put a little sample here of how to fill out the address. You'll need to fill out the Dear line. So it would be Dear Representative so-and-so or Dear Senator so-and-so. All right, so that was the presentation today. Let me go through the chat box here really quick, see if there's any questions. And then if anybody has one after I look at these, if you want to unmute yourself and ask a quick question. We are at just about an hour already. I don't want to go too far over. Yes, Brenna. Yep. Okay, Susan, why don't they use drones and video everything? Drones actually scare wild horses. I've seen people share some footage of drones. The horses are scared of them. Even my corgi, my little dog, is scared of drones because they make a certain high-pitched sound, which just is not pleasant for animals at all, actually. I think that's probably the reason why the airplanes are much higher up, so it's just not as scarier as a drone would be. I don't disagree with you. I think video would be great. I think the most accurate method of counting the wild horses would obviously just be on the ground, and it's not as hard as BLM would make it sound. Photographer Jim Brown did it last summer. I think it was last summer, might have been the summer before. He and 9 people counted all the horses in the Northlander complex. And the Northlander complex consists of the Conant Creek HMA, the Rock Creek HMA, the Muskrat Basin HMA, and the Dishpan Butte HMA. And just via truck and via OHVs, they did photography, and they counted as many horses as they could over a few days' time. Then they were able to compare the photographs to make sure that they didn't double count. And he came up with very accurate population counts. The BLM could easily do that if they wanted to. They just don't want to take the time. And then there's other herds like McCulloch Peaks where BLM knows every single horse out there. They have photographs of them. They keep a catalog. They even name the horses. Sometimes they'll ask a photographer to name a horse, but for the most part, the Cody BLM office names them. That's just a rare example. And then you have the Oniki herd where the Oniki catalog keeps a complete catalog of the horses that are out there. They're not all named. Some of them are just represented by an ID number. But that's far and few between. So I don't disagree with you. I think doing it not via infrared sensor and not via airplane, there are many other more methods that would be far more accurate. Raylene, what year did BLM start rounding up horses? That's a really good question. Horses were rounded up to the point where Congress thought they were going to go extinct in the 60s, which is why they unanimously passed the 1971 Act. At that point, the Bureau of Land Management was then given the task of maintaining wild horses on our public lands. So I can't say whether they started doing it straight away, but I know they've definitely been doing it from the 80s for sure. Somebody like Laura Lee could probably answer that question better. Mike Jenkins, how do you fly 300,000 acres in one day? Yeah, I don't disagree with you, Mike. That does seem like a bit of an impossibility. Has public comments ever changed BLM's plan? I'm going to say no. But again, that shouldn't dissuade us all from making our public comments. What the public comment period does is opens up BLM to possible litigation. And again, if we don't comment on every plan that comes out, it just tells BLM that we don't care. So it's still just important to stay involved in the process. It also just gives you a really good idea of how the Bureau of Land Management does things. And that we're basically telling them we know what's happening. We're going to do our very best not to let you get away with it. But again, Congress is going to be the one who stops it. So we need to be involved in the public comment period, but we also need to be very involved in contacting Congress and getting them to make positive changes that will actually stop roundups and enforce range management, which is what the BLM is not doing. Let's see. Are they planning on using PZP on any rounded up mares so they can be released? So originally with White Mountain, there were 4 possible plans that are actually listed in the EA, and I think they list them again in the DNA. They at least refer to them anyway. And one of those options was to round up the horses and actually perform sterilization on the mares, not only by darting them, but also by inserting IUDs and then gelding the stallions and releasing them. So their overall goal with White Mountain will be to make it basically a non-reproducing herd at some point. And they were definitely going to do that before they got some feedback that the herd is a popular reason why people visit Rock Springs is to go see those horses. I can't imagine, honestly, if you're not going to go see wild horses in White Mountain or Saltwells Creek, I don't know why anybody would go to Rock Springs otherwise. To be honest with you, there's just not much else there. But in this particular roundup, no, they are not going to be using any fertility control on the mares because they are not releasing any of the horses at all. They're removing the 586 and keeping them all. So whichever horses remain on the range will certainly be able to reproduce. Also, when I spoke with Jay, the Rock Springs Wild Horse Manager, when I bumped into him in Salt Wells Creek last July, I asked him about darting Salt Wells Creek or White Mountain horses, and he said it would never, ever, ever happen. Never. Not with native PZP, not with any other form of darting. He stated it was difficult. He asked me if I understood the logistics of darting. I said, yes, I do. And he said, do you realize you need to get pretty close to the horses for that to happen? And I looked at him and I laughed because we were about 150 feet away from a rather large band of horses, and those horses could have cared less. But he indicated that being 150 feet away would be too difficult. And he said under no circumstances would he allow birth control, any sort of darting at all, even with what in my opinion is the only acceptable form, which is native PZP. He just was never going to allow it. Not by veterans, not by anybody. I hope that answered your question in a long roundabout way. Awesome, Julie. You and a friend are speaking to Senator Van Hollen of Maryland on March 28th. Great. If you could just let me know how that goes. Maybe take that McCulloch Peaks letter with you as an example. And I'm also going to be doing a letter on the Northlander complex here shortly. I don't know if I'll have it done by March 28th, but I'll try. And that would be a great one for you to take with you as well. And thank you, Mike. Our state representatives have up to 3 local offices in the state. I will send to all. Perfect, Kim. If you don't want to print out that many copies and send them out, you can also just call one of the offices and ask them which state office is the main one. During that call, also ask for the email address of the staffer or intern who handles natural resources, appropriations, or public lands, and you can email them a copy as well. Letter number 2 has not yet come out, Kim. I'm working on it. Sherry. The AIP program, again, this is not something you want to mention in your public comment this time around because it's completely irrelevant and they'll just toss it. There is a lawsuit about the adoption incentive program presently. Otherwise, I don't know how we're going to get it turned around without just asking Congress to ask the BLM to stop it and actually showing them how many horses, wild horses, are being adopted and dumped at kill pens. Passing the SAFE Act might help that a little bit. It'll certainly stop kill pens from operating, although there are some Indian reservations that want to open slaughter plants, so that might just be a moot point. It will certainly stop anybody from shipping wild horses to Mexico or Canada for the purpose of slaughter. I know there have been AWHC, for example, did I think a 70-page letter on the AIP program. I wish they had sent that letter to every member of Congress, but I don't believe they did. You could find that letter on their website, print it, and give it to your legislator and talk to them about it. But in my opinion, it's only going to be Congress that stops it because BLM keeps telling Congress that to pay an adopter $1,000 to take a wild horse is a whole lot cheaper than the $28,000 it costs to keep that horse in long-term holding. So they look at it as a $27,000 benefit. So it's going to be a real hard sell to just get BLM to stop it. We're just going to have to convince our congressional members of why it's such a bad idea, how people are abusing the program. And actually, if you look up the AIP program and read the adoption process letter, those who adopt the horses are actually signing that they will not sell the horse thinking that it might get purchased by a kill buyer and sent to slaughter. It actually states that in the letter. Of course, people don't care. And there's multiple families who are doing the process over and over again, year after year, and just making money upon money doing it. And BLM is not doing enough checks on the horses because they couldn't possibly have enough employees to send out to every single adopter to check on them. It's a horrid program, and yes, it does need to end. You're absolutely right, Kim. BLM needs to know that they're being watched and be held accountable. Sherry, the White Mountain, I covered that pretty early on in the presentation, but it is just north of Rock Springs in Wyoming. And the White Mountain itself is located within the HMA somewhere. Michelle's right about Sandwash Basin. Governor Polis in Colorado did pressure the BLM to stop the Sandwash Basin roundup. I'm of the personal opinion that they stopped it within the main portion of the HMA. And what they actually did was they went north of the HMA to where some of the horses were outside of the HMA, and they actually continued to gather them up, and they were pretty close to meeting their quota anyway. We're not going to get any public involvement by the Wyoming governor unless we have a bunch of people in Wyoming who reach out to him and discuss it with him. And, you know, the tourism aspect of these areas is really important. And if you live in a state with wild horses and you're trying to convince them to keep the wild horses, touch on the tourism aspect of it. Because again, I don't know why anybody would go to the town of Rock Springs, Wyoming, if you're not going to go see wild horses. It's otherwise on a major interstate. Most of the people that stay in the hotels are traveling from one place to another and are typically just stopping in Rock Springs for a night over. Yeah, so, you know, tourism, convincing them to keep the horses. They do, by the way, want to zero out the Salt Wells Creek HMA, which is just south of Wyoming, and they want to zero out the Divide Basin HMA northeast of Rock Springs, Wyoming. It will take some years to do so, and there are 2 lawsuits in place to try and prevent that. Hopefully they're successful. I personally think the Salt Wells Creek HMA at over 1 million acres would be a fantastic national park for wild horses and wildlife, because it's just absolutely gorgeous there. Will those horses be turned over to tribal nations for disposal? I think he's asking if any BLM horses will be turned over to tribal nations, and the answer is no. Cody, Wyoming is the McCulloch Peaks HMA Cambria, not the White Mountain HMA. There are some reservations near Cody, though. Sherry, speaking with Senator Merkley, awesome. Again, give him that McCulloch Peaks letter. Tell him that even though the McCulloch Peaks herd is located in Wyoming, it's just a great representation of what is happening with all wild horses. Don't talk about horse slaughter during that meeting. Keep your focus on wild horses. The issue of horse slaughter should always be a separate email, a separate letter, a separate phone call. Never combine the 2 issues together because it's just confusing to the legislators. Awesome, Julie. Thank you. Letters from children is a fantastic idea. It is something that I got a lot of people to do during my first postcard campaign back in 2020. If you guys can keep sending them to your legislators, but also to the White House, absolutely. Can we mention that the BLM corrals are full and ask where all these horses are going to go? You can, and I know something that is something Carol Walker put in her points to make. They're not really going to care. The BLM has another 20,000 horses on the schedule this year, and they wouldn't have that many on the schedule if they didn't have places for them to go. So they've got several long-term holding pastures lined up and ready to take horses and be paid $3 per month per horse. These long-term holding pastures are mostly owned by ranchers 99% of the time, and they're making millions and millions of dollars just by being a long-term holding pasture for wild horses. So just for those of you that don't know, generally horses under the age of 5 are considered the most adoptable, and they will ship those horses around from event to event all around the country. As far as South Florida, these horses just get shipped everywhere to adoption events, with BLM hoping they'll adopt them out. Horses older than that, if they're not adopted out straight away, will typically go to holding. Horses over 10 can be considered sale authority horses. So BLM will sell them for as little as $25 each. Yeah, which is a disgrace. Ashley Avis has started a children writing campaign. Her movie is fantastic. Her documentary is. If you guys haven't seen it, please go watch it. Always talk about the cost to taxpayers when talking to your congressional members. At some point here, maybe I'll do a Zoom on the website spending.gov, where you guys can actually look up and see how much contractors are being paid to do roundups and how much the long-term holding facilities are being paid to hold wild horses. And those are figures that you want to give to your congressional member, no matter what state the roundup is taking place in, because I don't care if you live in Indiana, Florida, New York, or Oregon. Every single taxpayer across the country is paying for this, and that is something that your congressional members need to hear about. The last local staff member I have visited even mentioned to be sure to send the letter to DC. Oh, good. Yeah, with the exit of some congressional members, it might help us with getting some changes done, possibly. It might sometimes be easier to talk to new members of Congress and get into their ears before the ranchers and the Public Lands Council do. Develop a relationship with new members of Congress straight away. Get right in there and start a dialogue up with their staffers and their aides about it so that you have information in their ear before the Public Lands Council does. And just so you guys know, the Public Lands Council is made up entirely of ranchers. Julie, Rock Springs is blob in there. I agree with you. Again, don't know why you'd go if you're not going to go see the horses. I don't know a lot about corrections programs, Sherry, but I do know that oftentimes wild horses that are rounded up are shipped to corrections programs. Again, that shipping is paid for by the taxpayer. I've seen many, many contracts where contractors we even just pay them to load the horses up in a trailer and drive them from one place to another. It's absolutely ridiculous. Mustangs in prisons is wrong. I agree with you. I wouldn't say they experiment on them so much as they do train them and send them out, but I'm going to move on past the issue of correctional corrals right now. All right. If anybody has any quick questions, you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask. Otherwise, I'm going to get finished up here because we're an hour and 15 minutes. Mike Jenkins gave you guys the link to usaspending.gov. Yeah, again, I might do a Zoom on that sometime in the near future just to show you guys how it works. It can be a little confusing initially, but he gave you an example there that you can click on and go take a look at.
This is Sherry. Is it okay if I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
So you had mentioned if you're meeting with a senator or congressperson, separate the issue between roundups and slaughter.
Yep.
If you're sitting down and talking to like a senator's staff, what would be your main points that you would want to get across if you only had like a 45-minute meeting?
Generally, they want to know about any legislative issues that are out there. So you could talk about the helicopter bill, but really what I would focus on is just the fact that so much money and taxpayer dollars is being spent on these roundups and how BLM is going about it without doing proper range management, without doing proper range assessments, and even BLM admits themselves, if you look at their website and you search around it a little bit, and you should all take a day to do that on some cold winter day or day when you're spending the time inside. They even state in there themselves that they acknowledge that livestock grazing is what is demolishing our public lands. They acknowledge it.
Yeah, it's on the
yeah, you bring that up. I mean, just the amount of money being spent to round up wild horses, and that, there's really only 5 main ranching contractors who are paid to round up our wild horses. Dave Couture, who many of us know was in jail, he was jailed for harassing wild horses back in the 80s or 90s. His family performs most of the wild horse roundups to this day. And they have made over $43 million rounding up our wild horses over the years. There's a couple other ones, Samson Livestock, Uvalde Livestock, Sunjay Livestock is getting more and more into it. I would talk about the dollars. So go to that link that Mike Jenkins gave you at usaspending.gov, find the contracts. And if you want help finding them, I'm happy to help you out with that. But I would print some of those pages out and just say, look at how much of our money is being spent on these roundups. We don't agree with it. We want the BLM to be overhauled. We want them to do range management. We want them to do proper herd management area plans, HMAPs, and go that route instead. And then at the end of the meeting, if you want to bring up horse slaughter, do not tie it into wild horse roundups, but rather just talk about it separately. If your senator or representative is not yet sponsoring the SAFE Act, and there's a separate one for the Senate and there's a separate one for the House of Representatives, just simply talk about how you want them to co-sponsor the SAFE Act, which protects all equines in America from being shipped to slaughter. But don't tie it in with wild horse roundups. It's 2 separate legislative issues, and you're just going to confuse them.
And I noticed in the last couple of days, there's a press release where Tracy Manning, I can't think of her last name.
Stone Manning.
They're hiring, it's like she's delegating. They're hiring 2 people, like assistant deputies underneath her. and their bios are on, if you go to the BLM website, there's a press release. And I was able to Google the names of the people. So that's something if people are interested. I've been doing a lot of research off the BLM website. It's amazing the stuff you can find.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely.
So thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome, Sherry. Thanks for coming today. All right. Anybody else have any other questions? No? Okay, I'm gonna finish up. Why hasn't Tracy Stoneman said anything on the horses? I don't know, Cambria. Honestly, we all had such high hopes for Holland and Tracy Stone Manning. I guess because they're women. I guess we were hoping they would stand up against the ranchers. Holland sold out pretty quickly, like very, very quickly within her being in office. She had a meeting with U.S. representatives in Utah. I don't know if it was the senators or the House guy. Chris Stewart was one of them. What she wanted was Bears Ears back, and she gave up the wild horses in Utah to get Bears Ears National Monument back. So that pretty much just sealed her fate there. I mean, all we can do is just keep bugging her and bugging her and bugging her about it. We've tried to get meetings with her when we've been in DC and have had no luck. We tried to get meetings with Tracy Stone Manning and had no luck. I actually think we would have gotten one with Stone Manning last year if we had contacted her a little sooner. But she did meet with the Public Lands Council at the exact same time that we were in DC. She just didn't have time in her very busy schedule for us as well. So I wouldn't stop contacting them. I mean, they still need to know that what they're doing is wrong and that we're watching them and they need to listen to us. So anytime you guys feel like sending them an email or a letter or making a phone call, please don't stop doing it. We just need to keep up doing it, as frustrating as it is. And absolutely, just keep sending letters anyway. Sending letters is great, but again, ultimately what you guys need to do is form a relationship with your congressional members' offices. Again, most of the time you're going to be talking to a staffer who's in their 20s. They're actually quite happy to hear from us. They just want people to talk to. Be nice to them, because if you're going to get what you want out of them, you need to be nice and friendly. No yelling, no screaming, no calling names, etc., etc. You want to develop a good, healthy relationship with them so that you can get them to do what you want them to do. All right, you guys, I'm going to finish up for today. I will send out an email recap. I'll put this up on the website shortly so you can refer back to it. Your public comment is due by this Friday, and I think it's 4 p.m. Mountain Time. So that would be, I believe, 3 o'clock Pacific and 6 o'clock Eastern. So just make sure you get your public comments in by lunchtime on Friday. If anybody has any questions, you're welcome to email me. Galaxy Tab A7, you have your hand up. Do you still have a question? No? Okay. All right, guys, I'm going to stop this for now.
Mute, sorry. I don't know
No,
why
it's okay.
my name up there, why it's just a
Oh, is
tag.
that you, Diane? Yeah.
Yes, I don't know why my name didn't come up this time, but I had
That's
a little
okay.
get logged on. But one thing I don't know whether this would help, but one thing the staffer, which I was lucky enough to get a senior staffer this last time,
Mhm.
a one, but she was a little higher up the food chain. She said, make sure if you're requesting those meetings with Manning or Holland to request them and send us a letter or get a hold of us and make sure you have told them or to tell them that you have tried to get a meeting with them several times to try to get help with that. That was just something she threw out there.
That is an absolutely great point to make. And would you just tell everybody really quickly, Diane, just how easy it is to talk to the people in the offices?
Oh yeah, it's super easy. And the more you do it, of course, it gets easier. And then I've done it, well, not that it's, I've done it enough times every time I can locally that they know me when I walk in. So they already know what's going on, but they've gotten, it seems like, more receptive because of that.
Exactly. That's exactly the point. That's why you guys need to develop relationships with your offices. So if you can, sign up for that Zoom meeting with me and Chris Command next Monday, and we'll get you started on the road to do that. All right, you guys, I'm going to stop this for today. Let me know if you have any questions, and thank you all for coming. And please make your public comments. Wild horses need our voices, and it's up to you guys to do that. So thank you.